Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on evaluating behavioral health apps in the Mhealth Index and Navigation Database. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. John Torous from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, who is the director of the Digital Psychiatry Division. We are also joined today by Alon, a clinical research assistant, working with Dr. Torous, as well as Sam Kwon, a research student involved in the Evaluating Behavioral Health Mhealth Index and Navigation Database. Let me provide everyone with a little bit of details before we start today's discussion. Today's webinar is 60 minutes in length, and we will start as we did on time, and we will end on time. We are allowing approximately 45 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes plus minus a minute for questions and answers. We also have some time toward the end of the presentation to ask you to complete a brief poll, and we would appreciate your doing that. Attendees are in listen-only mode. Please use the questions panel if you have questions at any time during the presentation, and we will ask them on your behalf. We also are recording today's webinar, and it will be available on our website in just a few days. We encourage everyone to tweet during the webinar. As you can see on the slide in front of you, we have the tweet handles for MHDC, Dr. Torous, as well as the hashtags for today's events. And you can see the handout for today's presentation in the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel. You can pull that down and review it during or after today's discussion. So please avail yourself of that. After today's presentation, we will be having additional events that we want to apprise you of, especially the one we have coming up on September 12th, which is featuring Dave DiCaprio and Carol McCall from Closed Loop AI, talking about how AI drives tangible results and a return on investment in healthcare. So please mark your calendars for September 12th for that webinar. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Dr. John Torous is Director of the Digital Psychiatry Division in the Department of Psychiatry at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, a Harvard Medical School affiliated institution, and he serves also as a staff psychiatrist and assistant professor in the Harvard Medical School. He has a background in electrical engineering and computer sciences and received an undergraduate degree in the field from UC Berkeley before attending medical school at UC San Diego. Welcome, John. Also joining me is Alon, a clinical research assistant at the Digital Psychiatry Lab at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Noy leads the team's app evaluation efforts and is in charge of uploading and updating the largest database of mental health applications, known as the Mhealth Index and Navigation Database, or MIND, one of the best acronyms I've seen in quite a while. Noy graduated from Brown University with a degree in biology in May of 2022. Welcome, Noy. Sam Kwon is a research student at the Digital Psychiatry Lab at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and a rising senior at Vanderbilt University, which we affectionately refer to as the Harvard of the South. Sam works as an app rater for the Mhealth Index and Navigation Database, working with Noy and Dr. Torous on the largest database of mental health applications. Sam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Danny. Great to be with you today.
Terrific. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to stop talking and turn the program over to our speakers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me and our team to talk about really this broad space of evaluating behavioral health apps. I think as you'll see, what we're talking about is very transdiagnostic the same challenges would apply to evaluating apps for headache, for pain, and for sleep. And the examples that my team will give later, we have actually indexed those apps in this database as well. So we're taking behavioral health in a very broad sense of the word. We're also beginning to talk to our colleagues in cardiology to apply the same framework. So even if you don't work with behavioral health patients, I think there should be something of relevance for you in this. But if we take a step back and say, why are we even talking about behavioral health apps? The real reason is we know that patients are turning to them. We know that they're asking questions about them. They're using them. And we know that they can have some utility. But as of now, right, in summer 2022, when we're recording this, there's very little effective regulation for these behavioral health apps. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for it. It's not for lack of effort by health regulators, especially the federal government. It's that these devices can be a little bit tricky to categorize. If they are a device, are they a wellness device? But in behavioral health, the situation became even more complex because with the federal declaration of the COVID emergency, there actually was a special section that kind of called out software for behavioral health and really loosened regulations that were already very loose beforehand to an even greater extent. And I think that really has presented some challenges around it. So if we even quickly look at one example that we can see that will pop up, this is a headline again. We are not here to endorse any product. We're not here to say any product is bad. Any examples we use are just for the sake of examples. But again, this was a headline that says Happify rolls out digital therapeutic for anxiety and depression under temporary FDA guidance. So it says Happify is making its app-based treatment available to patients thanks to loosened FDA guidance last year that lets digital health companies targeting some behavioral health conditions release their product without clearance. The company is launching an investigational study to get data for a future FDA submission. And again, this is a headline. It's about 1 year old. I don't know the current status of that data or that study, but the point being, you can see it can become quickly very confusing for patients, for clinicians, for CIOs to really figure out what is this app, what is it doing, what type of backing does it have? And as we know, not everything needs FDA approval to be used either, but we're already getting a sense, right, in the behavioral health space, what's a complex space of apps and digital software is perhaps more complex, more so. So if we think about what are different regulators doing in, say, the Federal Trade Commission, what's interesting, in September of last year, actually, the Federal Trade Commission stepped in and they said, even for apps that are not claiming that they're going to be medical devices, they're saying that they are a wellness product. The FTC was so worried, they said, well, if you're collecting health data, say related to steps, or in our case, say mood tracking for mental health, and you lose that data for whatever reason, you still have to, as a company, follow kind of the HIPAA breach rules. So you can see that the FTC is beginning to step in and beginning to say that we need to have really some accountability in the space because of what's happening even for things that are not regulated. So again, classically, right, the FDA would do pre-market, the FTC would do post-market, but the situation is very complex. And as we can see, it's very tricky. And in some ways, our team actually has made a schematic of the entire landscape. I'll take you all through. And this comes from a paper that was published in June of last year. And what we're saying is, let's say we start with a question mark. We have an app and we're saying, what are we going to do with this app? And the first thing is a software developer would say, is it software as a medical device or is it not? And if you say no, it becomes a wellness device. It lives outside, right, of the classical healthcare regulation that all of us know about, we think about, we work on. And as we'll go into, and Noy and Sam will give examples, a lot more things are actually declaring themselves to be wellness devices than we think. And that really changes what type of privacy protections, what type of standards, even what marketing claims they can make. And again, you would be surprised, it's not just the behavioral health apps on kind of what is calling itself a wellness app and is it really that? But let's assume for the sake of this talk that you say, well, this app is a wellness, it is software as a medical device. The FDA actually has a category called enforcement discretion, and they say, look, even if you have an app and it's doing something that we would consider in the realm of a medical device, if you're very low risk and you fall into buckets, say around kind of tracking symptoms, providing education to patients, connecting them to a portal, technically you're a medical device, but you fall under enforcement discretion, we are not going to actively regulate that. We still could, but they're saying we have these kind of examples. And most apps in the behavioral health space actually fall into that enforcement discretion. If you don't fall into that bucket and we get to that green box that says focus of FDA oversight, really then again, you're kind of back to the more standard one where you say if you've never been seen before, you're kind of de novo pathway. And if you're like something else, you kind of get a 510K submission. But I think what becomes fascinating in this space is, one, what is the line between a wellness app and a medical device, especially in behavioral health? What is the line between stress and anxiety, between mood and depression? And again, which products are sitting on what side of it? How do we actually evaluate a new app? What is the type of appropriate control group? How do we actually know the evidence is representing what we hope it does and what it means? So the FDA has realized the current system is not perfect. They have the pre-cert pilot program. It's been a pilot program for a couple years, but it does kind of present their vision of what a future regulatory system could, and perhaps you could say should look like. That said, it's not active right now. It doesn't provide information, again, for patients, clinician, or CIOs to make decisions. As you can see in the top right of the figure, the federal FTC is really looking at things more in the post-market. Some of you may have seen they sued the Women's Health, the period tracking app Flow last year for privacy concerns. So if this figure is a little bit overwhelming, I agree. I wish it could be simpler. If you can help our team simplify it, we'd love your help on that. But again, I think it provides one reason why it's so hard to understand regulation in this space, especially around apps and how to make informed decisions about picking them. But if we focus on privacy and kind of why is there a need for this regulation, I think that we've probably all seen different headlines, right, around kind of privacy concerns, especially in Mhealth apps. And again, this doesn't just include behavioral health apps, this includes all of these apps. This is one very impressive study from BMJ that, as you can see, looked at a lot of apps and found certainly many concerns. If you Google the Mozilla Health Foundation mental health apps, there's an amazing report from May of this year where the Mozilla Foundation independently tested the different privacy features of apps and really found, again, they were still lacking. So things have not improved since June 21 when the study was done. And again, you could say a lot of these apps are technically not violating any law because they're in the privacy saying we're actually a wellness app, right? We don't have to protect people's data. We're not claiming to offer healthcare, even though a reasonable consumer or patient may kind of think otherwise. Or again, if you're a CIO thinking of evaluating apps or bringing them into your software suite, you really do want to make sure you understand what the vendor says the app is. Again, is it a wellness device or is it a medical device? And if it's not a medical device, how are they protecting your data? Because the evidence is pretty strong that we have issues around keeping these things safe and secure. That's not the only challenge in the field that makes it hard to evaluate them. Engagement can be very difficult also. I think all of us know, no matter what field of healthcare that we're in, engagement is difficult. And sorry, I'll take a step back to evidence as well for these. So if we're assuming that we have a piece of software and we say, hey, we think it offers adequate security and privacy for people's data, of course we want to make sure it's evidence-based. We don't want our patients or staff using things that aren't effective. Again, a lot of apps will make very strong marketing claims. That's their right to make those claims. Are they actually valid is perhaps a trickier question to answer. And we've gone through literature and certainly looked at kind of what claims apps will make on their descriptions and their marketing material. When you try to tie that back to kind of peer-reviewed any type of evidence, you can see in the red box, it really gets down to like 1.4% when we looked at the evidence. And overall, the situation has not dramatically changed in that a lot of apps will make impressive claims, especially in the behavioral health space. not all of them, again, will go back to the evidence. And you can see this is a rather low bar of a citation to the scientific evidence, right? Where we're actually not saying that you have to have high quality studies. We're saying, do you have any? As I was saying before, let's assume we have something that is safe. We think it is evidence-based, and these do exist, as Noi and Sam will talk about. You want to make sure people can use it, right? We don't want to recommend, offer products, medications, therapy regimens, or digital products that people aren't going to stick with. This was a fascinating study done by Bamel. They actually got consumer data from a third party of popular behavioral health apps that had over 10,000 downloads. And kind of like Nielsen TV ratings, what they did is that they basically were able to see if you download this app, so in the general public, what are you going to open it 1 time, 2 times, 10 times? Again, we know most behavioral health conditions, some are chronic, some can be short-term, but usually we want people in treatment for at least a month. But if we look at this graph, you can see that after about 5 days, we've lost about 90% of people. After 10 days, it's about 95% of people have really stopped coming back to these apps. You can see from the graph, it's mental health issues, it's mindfulness apps, it's happiness apps, and all apps. And we can look at a different perspective of the same data as well. And you can see it breaks it down into mindfulness, are these kind of symptom trackers, are these peer support, breathing. You can see there's slight differences, but overall we have to be very careful about, again, selecting apps we want people to use where engagement is going to be high, because if we just hand something to someone, we have a 95% chance that they're not going to be using it after 5 days. So if we kind of put all of these pieces together, in some ways, this is what we would expect from evaluating any product, right? We want to make sure that the risks are minimal, that the evidence is high, that's actually easy to use it, that people engage with it. And then, of course, the top of that pyramid is, will it actually be useful in clinical care? Will it work with different APIs we have to get into the medical record? Not always necessary, but can at least patients access to data? Can clinicians access to data? Is it going to be meaningfully used? Not in the sense that, again, we would think in this form, but again, is it actually clinically going to make a difference for patients? So I think we can all agree that a framework like this is reasonable. We start with the risk, we look at the evidence, we look at ease of use, we look at kind of clinical purpose. And this relates actually to a framework that our team helped develop for the American Psychiatric Association. We call it the APA App Evaluation Framework. And the pyramid structure is very important because what we've done, and if you look at the American Psychiatric Association's website, that pyramid structure has really been used to guide and help practicing psychiatrists and behavioral health clinicians think about these things in order, to really look for apps that first have privacy, then to kind of move a level up and say, do they have evidence? Are they easy to use? But I think one challenge, and I'm going to hand it over to Noi in a second, is it really puts a lot of burden on the clinician, right, to have to go through that pyramid to kind of think about, what are the risks of this app? Is it a health app? Is it a wellness app? What is the evidence for it? Is it going to be easy to use? I mean, clinical visits are relatively short for most visits. In behavioral health, sometimes we have the privilege of having longer visits, but again, if we look at that pyramid, we can see, right, these are very broad categories that have a lot of questions. And on the American Psychiatric Association website, you can find more detailed versions of that pyramid that will really offer you a lot of individual questions to ask. And again, someone will be very specific, but I think at this point, we have hopefully set up why it's complex to make sense of the behavioral health app space, as well as any health apps, what some of the broad challenges are. And again, I think now we'll jump into solutions and things that you can do to make better decisions today.
Yeah. So basically what I'm going to be showing you is the database that we've been alluding to throughout this talk, and how we found it to be helpful to address some of the difficulties and challenges with evaluating behavioral health apps, as John just covered. So really what we did is we helped to develop that APA app evaluation pyramid, and we broke it down. Our lab broke it down to 105 objective questions that align with the levels of the pyramid. But now that we have objective questions, we can go ahead and answer them and see if an individual app fulfills each level of the pyramid and to what extent it meets all that criteria. So you can see that we broke down some of the categories that are presented on the screen, and these objective questions really measure the presence of a feature and not the quality. So, and we'll give you some examples in a few slides, but what we're really looking at, does an app have or does not have this feature? We are not attesting or claiming that it is of quality. And what we also try to do with these objective questions is to make them binary, yes and no, or numeric responses. So it would be relatively easy for, let's say, a trained operator to go ahead and evaluate many different behavioral health apps. So we are actually now going to take you through an example of how myself and Sam and a group of trained volunteers use the 105 objective questions to evaluate an app. So this is just an example that and maybe some of you are familiar with. It's one of the most, it's a well-known behavioral health app, PTSD Coach, by the made by the Department of Veteran Affairs. And we're going to start by asking some questions about the app. So first, when we look to evaluate an app, we want to really look at where is the app coming from. So this also goes into kind of that risk and that first level of the pyramid. So does it come from the government, yes or no? Does it come from a for-profit developer? Really looking at, okay, who made and developed this app, maybe what kind of processes went into developing this app. So for PTSD Coach, we know it's made by the government, it's made by the US Department of Veteran Affairs. So if we go to the next category of questions, now we're really digging into the privacy and security. So that really second level of that pyramid. How is this app claiming to use the data that I inputted? So it's really important to remember that these questions, again, are objective and binary. So is there a privacy policy? Yes, there is. No, there is not. We are not attesting to the quality of the privacy policy. And if you have looked at the privacy policies of different apps in general, you can see that the quality of them differs significantly. But what we're really asking, is there a privacy policy? Does the app declare data use and purpose? And you can see that it goes into some detail of what types of data are shared. Can you delete your data? Does the app claim to meet HIPAA requirements? So these are all questions that when a trained operator goes and reads the privacy policy, we mark a yes or no answer to. If we move on to the next category, we're really looking at accessibility. So who is able to use this app? So does the app work offline? We know that some patients might not necessarily have access to broadband internet or a good Wi-Fi connection. So maybe it's important to that particular patient or population that that app has capabilities and functionalities that work without a Wi-Fi connection. Does it work in Spanish? We know that some apps are able to cater to multilingual populations and some just don't have that. And then importantly, we find that one of the most important criteria, specifically for anecdotally for some of the patients that I've worked with, is looking at cost. Do I have to pay money? Is it totally free? Are there any hidden fees that when I download the app, I actually find out to access all the functionality I need to pay? So these are all, once again, yes or no questions that we look at an app when we evaluate it. And if we move on to the next category, we're going to start looking at what is actually inside the app. So all those questions previously were looking at not necessarily what was inside the app, but all of the things surrounding the app. Now we're going into the app and seeing, okay, what information am I inputting? So am I inputting surveys, my location, am I giving the app access to camera? And what is the app outputting to me? Is it giving me notifications? Is it giving me reminders? Is it giving me graphs and summary of my data? Maybe that's really important to me. And as we look through all these features, an important thing that I would like to note is that we as trained operators and developers of the database look at every single question. But that's not to say that when you look at an app or when you use our database, you have to look at every single question. We almost provide too much information to you so you're able to make an informed decision. But if we go to the next category, when we look at an app, we're really looking at the clinical foundation. So this is addressing the lack of an evidence base that John showed you some data about. So because there is such a lack of an evidence base for the majority of health apps, we are really just looking for the presence of any scientific evidence. We do categorize if the study claims to be a feasibility usability study or if it's an efficacy study, but aside from that, we're not attesting or claiming that the quality of the data or the quality of the methodology. We find that first, there aren't a lot of scientific studies to support the health apps out there, and second, it's hard just due to different methodology used to attest to the quality of them. So we once again are really focusing on the presence of, and just because having a scientific citation is so rare, we find that is a good way to differentiate between the apps. We also ask, can the app cause harm? So is there an unproctored chat room that maybe no one is looking at what kind of messages are being sent between peer support? That would count as an example of maybe the app can cause harm because there's no way to filter out the messages that are being sent, and someone could potentially send a harmful message to a user. It's an example of another question. And finally, if we go next, we're looking at app features. So this is an extensive list once again, because these mental behavioral health apps are very heterogeneous. They offer different features that cater to different populations and supported conditions. So we try to be as exhaustive as possible. So we're looking at all the different features that an app offers. What can you do with the app? Can you track your mood? Can you receive some education? Can you potentially get some therapies that maybe you receive with a licensed clinician, for example, see cognitive behavioral therapy? Maybe it's really important for you to get some peer support. So these are, once again, all the ways that the app, all the things you can do within the app. And what we've done is we've taken all of this information and put it, and one more category is engagement style. So this is, what does the app use and do to try to attract its users back? So again, we're looking at, if you remember the graph that John presented, is that users tend to not be engaged with certain apps. So now we're trying to see, okay, how are the apps trying to address those engagement problems? Do they use videos, gamifications? Do they have their own badge system or achievement system within the app? Do they use a chatbot? We find some apps do offer a chatbot feature. Are they mainly chat and message based, so you can send messages through, let's say, to your clinician, to a peer support? Do they use screeners? So do they use a GAD7 or a PHQ-9, a validated screener within the app to give you some information? So these, once again, are just the presence of and not the quality of all the different ways an app can try to attract its users and retain that consistent engagement. If we move on, we will see that, so something that's important to a user can be, okay, what is this app intended for? You're giving me all this information about what I could potentially do, all the features. In a nutshell, what is this app intended for? Is it a self-help app? Is it mainly a reference app? Can I use it with my therapist? So this question really shows the broad, if you take all the features, if you take all the engagement, you take all the inputs and outputs and everything the app is offering, what is the main functionality or the main use case that that app offers? And in addition, how can you use the data that you're inputting in it? So do you own your data? So that question really means is, can you access, edit, and delete the data that you are inputting to an app? And it's depending if that's a personal preference, that can be an important question. Can you email or export your data? So if you're putting in all this data about, let's say, your physical health, all your exercises, your mood, can I take that data, email it to myself, and show it to a clinician during my session? So once again, these are different features that apps offer that we look at a very objective level. And if we move on, so we've taken all of these questions and we've put it on a user-friendly website called Mind Apps. So right now, I'm going to show you. So you should see the website called Mind Apps. So when you first get on the website, this is the homepage that you see. If you are not sure about what app you want to use, you can take this short quiz and fill out some information. So let's say I have an Apple device, and you can fill this out. Or if you already know kind of what you want, you can start checking off features here. So let's say I know I want to track my mood. I can check the features off there. Let's say I want some mindfulness exercises. I can check off, and then all I have to do is go and click either search now here or up here. So let's click search. And now you will see, you will be brought to the application library. So this is the library that houses all of our apps. We currently have close to 700 different apps on our database, and that number, wow, 700 sounds a bit overwhelming, but once you start filtering out specific features, a platform, perhaps cost, you'll slowly narrow it down to get a much more curated list of apps that are suitable for you. So what we want to emphasize, and what is really the utility of this database, is we do offer a lot of different filters, as you can see as I start opening the filters. But you don't have to check off filters in every single category. We really want patients, clinicians, and users to figure out what's important to them. So if you don't care about cost, you don't care to pay, you don't care if an app is free, just ignore it. If you don't care who the developer is, it doesn't bother you, just ignore it. And you only need to really check off the filters that are important to you. So I have an Apple phone, I want you to use these two things, and you know what, having a privacy policy is really important to me. I want to be able to read how my app will use the data. If you look down here at the small number, you'll see that though our database has close to 700 apps, now we only have 84 applications to choose from. So as you start filtering it, you will see that there are less and less apps to choose from. And let's say I actually do care that there are some supporting studies. So now we see some apps that claim to have some supporting studies, that have a privacy policy and have the features that I'm looking for. So you can scroll through the apps, and once you find one you think you like and you want to learn more about it, you can click on it. Read the description from the App Store, so we do not change or edit this in any way. We hope to give you the information on the App Store. In addition, you can look at the screenshots in the App Store to get a sense of what the app looks like, and then you can look at all of the answers to the questions that we just went over here. So everything that the app has to offer, the cost, the privacy, and after this information, if you deem that this is an app for you, you could go ahead and click to get directed straight to either the app developer's website or the App Store or the Google Play Store. So that's how you use the Mind apps. If you want some more information about the framework and how we developed it, you can go under the framework tabs, and if you want some information about current news or you want to give us some feedback, you can hit the community tab. And that is the end of the live demo. And then, so really, Mind Apps is not just a passion project of mine and Sam and John's. We have published some articles about the website. We've done not only literature reviews to make sure that our questions that we're asking are comprehensive and reflective of different app evaluation databases. We've really tried to make, and some of those articles are presented on the next slide, and we really tried to ensure that this research project has direct clinical uses and can be relevant within a patient's care. So some of the interesting things we've done with Mind Apps is once you have a collection of different mental health apps, you can really look and summarize what these behavioral health apps do to engage their users, what are the common features. So you get some really interesting graphs like this one that show what are some of the common features of behavioral health apps. So as you can see that we're able to generate, okay, well, you see that a lot of behavioral health apps like to have peer support, like to have deep breathing, so meditation exercises, and we can start to draw some conclusions of if those, let's say, strategies are like effective, if what makes behavioral health apps unique to, let's say, just going to your therapist, what is you get some interesting data out of the database as well, and it's not just for clinical uses. We really do try to use it also for research projects and assess what is the current state of the marketplace out there. And I'm going to leave it off to Sam, who's going to review some case scenarios and show you guys how you can use Mind Apps with different clients.
Yes, so we will now look at some scenarios to really introduce these cases as examples of what patients or users want and how we can use our Mind database to find the app that really meets patients' unique needs and preferences. So in the first case scenario, I'll just run through with you guys to see how we find the app. So the client is experiencing depressive symptoms, potentially a mood disorder. They're interested in using an app to log their mood every day. In their spare time, they enjoy writing in a journal. They would prefer to have an app where they could connect with someone such as a therapist. The digital navigator asks them if any engagement features interested them. The client believes having videos will help them sustain app usage over time. Lastly, the client feels strongly about having an app that meets HIPAA and offers a crisis management feature. So you can see in a bolded letter that we highlighted some important keywords that would be applicable to our Mind App database to find the unique app that patient wants. So if we go to our database, and you click through all these different features that were highlighted and other filters, you should be able to find this app called Sanvelo Anxiety and Depression. So that was just a walkthrough of some keywords to look for in this case scenarios and find the app using the Mind database. So in the next case scenario, we want you to try finding the right app by looking at this script. So I'll give you a minute or two to look through this script, find some keywords, and going through the filters on Mind's database to find the app. In this scenario, we say a client is having trouble sleeping, is feeling really down, unmotivated, and reports experiencing anxiety from school pressures. They have used CBT before and felt it actually had a positive impact on them. They have heard about the benefits of meditation and deep breathing and want to try it. Their ideal app would be that is both a self-help app where they can manage their own information, and a reference app where they can learn more about what they're experiencing. So we again highlighted some keywords. So when you go to Mind Database and go through this filters again, I hope you found WISA, Anxiety Therapy Chatbot, and that is the app that the patient was looking for, and that met the filters that the patient was specifically looking for. And our last case scenario, we also have a patient who is a Spanish speaker looking for an app available in her native language. She suffers from anxiety. She doesn't think there is an app out there for her because she shares an apartment with several people, so the Wi-Fi is not usually that strong. So you inform her that there are apps that function offline and you can help her find one for her. She is only willing to download an app that is totally free. She also mentioned that her therapist suggested she incorporate deep breathing exercises into her day. Your client will only trust apps that offer supporting clinical studies that prove the app really works from a scientific perspective. Lastly, she's looking for an app that measures her productivity. So from this case scenario, we again find some filters that are relevant to our database. There's Spanish. We want the supporting conditions to be under anxiety. We want the functionality to work as an offline. We want the cost to check totally free. Some features to have deep breathing exercises, and the clinic and the app has a supporting clinical studies, and that is able to measure her productivity. So when we are able to again go through our Mind App database to filter through these keywords and select the necessary boxes, we should be able to find the app called Virtual Hope Box. So that is just some examples of how we really find the app that uniquely meets the need and the preferences of patients using our database. Thank you. And at this point, I'll turn the program over back to Denny for our questions and answer session.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you, John and Noy. This is fascinating stuff. We live in a universe of applications, and to see what work you have done to help us navigate that universe is impressive, and I think of great benefit to many people. We have a number of questions we'd like to follow up with, and we encourage those of you in the audience to please type your questions into the Q&A box so we can ask the questions on your behalf and get you the answers you're looking for. One of the questions we have is there a minimum standard that apps need to meet to be listed on Mind? Or, apart from the fact that perhaps they don't meet any of the criteria, are there ways that you look at apps and say, this falls outside of what we're looking for, this is not suitable? What's the minimum standard that apps need to meet in order to be listed on the site?
I'll start with this and then hand it over to Sam for some actually very specific examples. So I think we're always happy to look at almost any app, but I think what's tricky, right, and again, we'll have an example Sam to share, but if we look for apps for schizophrenia, right, a very serious condition, one where we definitely want to increase access to care, and apps could offer tremendous potential. There's a lot of apps that come up when you search for schizophrenia. But what happens, and again, Sam actually went through many of them this summer, you'll open it and one actually was a Pong game where you played Pong with a medication. And it said if you lost a game, you lost your mind. Clearly wrong, stigmatizing, inappropriate. We are not going to put that app up there. The app is called Schizophrenia, the game. You could say, is it a simulation? Is it helpful? So some of them are blatantly just stigmatizing and unhelpful. And again, it's unfortunate those ones are still on the app stores. They come up very frequently when you search them, and that's not good. But I'll let Sam give some more examples of ones that just don't make the cut, even though they kind of have the right keywords or descriptions.
Yes, certainly. This summer, again, I specifically look for the apps on schizophrenia, and some apps I would go through the rating, and if I have some questions, I'll certainly reach out to Dr. Torous to answer. But some of the apps are very outdated. Some of them have information that have been cut off from DSM-5, but that was included in DSM-4. So we do not include those those apps that include outdated information and has not been updated for really like 4 years. So these apps do not make the cut, and we actually take them off from our database if they do exist already on our MindApps database.
Yeah, and again, 4 years is a long time not to even update the app, right? We're not saying like that means the developer hasn't even logged in to try to update it to keep it up to date. So it won't even run well on most phones because it hasn't met the security standards. Some of them just offer inappropriate information. In the past, we've seen apps that tell you to have a dance party. I guess it's interesting if you think a dance party is useful. It doesn't follow many medical guidelines or best practices. I mean, it's interesting. So again, I think sometimes people make apps with good intentions. Sometimes they're just kooky, but it's something you really wouldn't want to share with a family member. So I guess the bar is surprisingly very low, right? We talked about don't be stigmatizing, don't be 4 years out of date, don't be irrelevant. But a lot of apps don't make that cut. We're not talking about an elite cut to get on here.
Well, thank you. That's the dance party gives me a lot of ideas, none of them psychological, but I appreciate the answer. We have a question also related to, you have 105 questions in your database. Do you collate the answers to those 105 questions in any way, or are they just ways that people can filter apps on the website? If scoring happens, are questions given equal weight? Is there a score for a category? Are questions that might not apply to every app treated differently? Just, you collect this incredible data. When you look at the results to those 105 questions, are there things that you do with those data to help us understand more and more about this universe of behavioral health apps?
It's a good question, and I think again when you right now can go to mindapps.org and search yourself, again you can click all 105 filters, you can click one. Right now we do assign, again they all come back as equal weight. The idea being, right, if someone says I really want an app that's private and that's most important, it's almost like you would have to pick the weights in your head. Because again, the problem is, right, other ways to look at apps will make assumptions, right? They'll say, this is most important for you, or we know some people truly don't care about privacy of their data, that they're okay with that, right? And some people care about only evidence. So I think in some ways we present all the facts, but we don't weight them or score them because no one has kind of proven, right, here's the magical formula for the best app for this person at this time for this condition. It really does become a very personal decision, right? You can imagine the same person at different times, just like they'll respond to different medications or therapy will. So we've kind of seen our role is to put the information out there, make it very easily accessible, but then really you probably have to think about, again, as Sam kind of showed you, there's filters you can pick, but which ones matter most to you? We have done research where we kind of scored the privacy ones. We said, well, again, apps that have more privacy features, that kind of makes sense to cluster together. And apps that have more engagement features, we could kind of say that that makes sense to cluster together. And what we've shown is apps that are more private are not necessarily the most popular ones. They're not necessarily the free ones, the expensive ones. It kind of is independent. It's, again, you have some very obscure little apps that do great privacy. You have some large name brand apps that have terrifying privacy policies. So what we've learned is there's no kind of easy cut and dry threshold. A couple of years ago, we tried to use all of our data and to try to build actually a, perhaps you could say, machine learning algorithm to kind of say these are the better apps and these are the apps you don't want. What I think was so tricky is when you build any algorithm, you have to have a paradigm of what you're training it against. You have to say this is a good app and this is not a good app. And it was very hard for anyone to agree on kind of what was a good app. What we could agree on was your first question, Denny, of what was a bad app. And so we actually then trained the algorithm backwards and said, how do we predict what's a horrible app and it's not going to be useful? And surprisingly, the strongest result was actually very simple. It was an app that has not been updated in 180 days is much more likely to be an app that's not appropriate. Again, not a strong, fast rule, but we didn't need a complex algorithm. The data was so clear. The app developer is not routinely updating it. There's a good chance it's not going to be a good app. It's kind of a red flag. There's many good apps that have not been updated in a year because it's yearly updated. So again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it does seem to, again, help screen out apps where they're kind of zombie apps, right? The developer just gave up, so they're not going to be updated for security, for evidence. They're not going to use modern APIs or integrate into health records. But I would say our job, we feel it, is to put information out there, but not to make cultural assumptions of how people want to use the data.
Thank you. We have a question from Emma, who conducts research on the prevention of depression in pregnancy and postpartum. And she asks, can we filter apps for specific populations? And she thanks you and congratulates you for an excellent seminar.
Noy, do you want to take that one, or where we tried to and the struggles with it?
Yeah, that's actually kind of a recent project that we've been wanting to look into and venture into, is looking at filters for, let's say, women's health, maybe a youth filter. It's, once again, it's a little challenging to go ahead and make those filters. So it's not something we currently have on the database, but it is something that we're looking into of how do we go by what the app claims in the App Store? Do we go by the privacy policy protections? So it's a little, and there's no standard metric of something that we can base our judgment off of, but it is something we are going to we would want to venture into.
Exactly. So it's more, again, if the app company says we target everyone in the world, is that enough of a metric to say it now targets women, it targets different minorities, it targets this? And then some apps may be really well done and they are targeted, say, to postpartum women, but the app company kind of doesn't highlight that in an objective way that's easy to kind of check off onto a database. So it does bring us the question, what do we do for things that are a little more subjective, where there's not an easy way to kind of say this was built for specialty in this, or this was built by people with lived experience? And we know many apps, right, that they do a lot of great work with patients, they get their voice in, and we think those are better apps. I'd say we know those are better apps, but sometimes the app company won't kind of tell you they built it that way. And we don't want to kind of have metrics, right, where we highlight apps that do something or don't do something. So if you can help us think of kind of easy ways that our operators can objectively and kind of in a way that we can audit, go back to and say, it is this, we'd be thrilled to do it. So you can see MindApps is a very flexible website. We can, in essence, add a new column, and we update these things every 6 months or sooner that Noy and her team of volunteers do. So within half a year, if we have a new metric, we can get it up and running quickly.
Thank you. What is the best way to help users keep using behavioral health or mHealth apps rather than dropping off? You know, from the graphs that you've shown, peer engagement seems to have a little more legs than others, but not a lot. What have you learned, if anything, helps people to stick with a behavioral health app rather than drop off?
You want to do that one too, Noy?
We've really seen that there has to be some sort of human connection or support guiding, not only for the first setting up the app and using the app, but also to sustain that engagement. There has to be some sort of connection with, let's say, it could be a peer, it could be a community healthcare worker, it could be your clinician, it could be a research staff member with other duties. And we've kind of coined this term to what we call a digital navigator. where we vision this person who really helps to integrate these mobile tools into someone's care, into someone's everyday life. And we find when a person knows, hey, on Friday, I'm going to meet with my digital navigator, I better do my CBT homework, or I should check in and do my mindfulness exercises. We find that engagement is much more sustained when they have this connection with some sort of human support to make sure that they're actually using the app and they're understanding the value and the utility of the app as well.
And what we think is fascinating about the digital navigator roles, this is someone can also help with digital literacy, right, to promote health equity. So we've shown you all these apps, but can everyone benefit? Most people have a phone, or we can help them get a phone from the government for free. But then do they know how to download apps? Do they have an iTunes account? Do they know how to kind of check it? So part of the digital navigator role is to make sure everyone can access technology and has the skills, and then can kind of, as Sam showed, guide people through finding apps and then be that human support to drive engagement, kind of like a gym buddy, right? This isn't a clinical role, but I think it's an equally important role that we can present information, but we have to make sure everyone can actively connect. And I think a digital navigator, in some ways, is kind of like a health app coach, not specific to behavioral health, but given the behavioral health crisis and the number of apps that we've shown you guys all exist, it's kind of it's a very good match.
Excellent. We're running down to about 3 minutes left in our webinar, and I want to be sure I get these two questions that have risen to the top of my list. First is, we're seeing more Mhealth apps being provided by employers as benefits. Do you have recommendations on how to evaluate what to supply to meet a wide variety of potential needs?
So our team actually wrote an article in Harvard Business Review. If you actually just type in our name in Harvard Business Review on this exact question, we actually kind of encourage employers to be a little bit skeptical, or to, again, actually use the database, one, to make sure it's not a free app that offers the exact same thing. And we said, really, again, the database doesn't go into too much evidence because we want to keep it easy to update, but a lot of the evidence of do these apps make a difference for employers, sometimes it's strong, but it may be worth consulting with someone in the field, because I think these apps are a nice idea, but they may not always provide that level of support we want them to today.
All right, thank you. And do you think we should have government standards or regulations around Mhealth apps?
I think we may need to, and again, if anyone just Googles Mozilla Foundation mental health apps, if we look, even there's a texting service, not an app called Crisis Text Line, that the FTC had to threaten to sue because of the way they were dealing with people's suicidal text messages recently. So I think that we've seen, there's just, again, I think we don't want to be a lack of trust. We want people to feel confident if you're talking about your health or mental health, that your information is, of course, secure. And I think as long as we don't have that, it goes back to a pyramid we showed. If we don't have that trust that clinicians or providers have that their data is secure, you're not going to really work on health, and especially mental health. And again, what we're asking for are very basic things, right? That people's data is not sold to third parties, it's kept safe. So I think if we're seeing that the free market has not done a good job on kind of enforcing basic standards, maybe that's a reason that we would say it could help to have the government give us a little bit more guidance, or give a little bit of teeth. And we saw the FTC rights already stepping in. That they're saying if you're a wellness app and you lose people's data, you have to follow the HIPAA breach rules, even though you're not a healthcare company. So it's a open question, but I think it will have to come because things are not getting better with self-regulation.
Thank you. We appreciate your sharing all of this insightful information with us. And I want to thank those of you who have asked questions. It's important to note, if we're unable to get to your questions, we will follow up with these questions. We'll send them to our speakers, and if their time is available or they can point us to a resource, that will be great. We will do that for you. And I want to say that this concludes today's formal program. I would like again to thank Dr. John Torous, Noi Alon, and Sam Kwon for a fantastic discussion. And I know we had a lot of engagement From our audience, almost everyone has stayed throughout the entire discussion, and we really appreciate your joining us today. Lastly, we know you all are busy. We're going to pop up a web survey for you to fill, and we would ask that you give us your feedback on our presentation and discussion today. We hope you will be joining us for upcoming programs at MHDC, and we wish you a splendid and great day. Thank you for joining us today.